In a land where ancestral wisdom shaped the future, there was a grand tapestry woven over generations. Each thread, spun by the kingdom's leaders, held history, structure, and power. But as time passed, the threads tangled. Quick fixes, patchwork solutions, and rigid rules turned the once fluid design into knots. The kingdom longed for progress, but every attempt to introduce a new thread risked unraveling the entire fabric. Yet, whispers spread. What if the tapestry wasn't the problem, but the way it was woven? What if the old could be reworked, not discarded? The answer was never to start over. It was to reweave, thread by thread. The sentient state. By 2040, governments no longer struggle with outdated public systems. AI-driven policy engines, blockchain-backed governance, and decentralized citizen input turn bureaucracy into an autonomous, trust-based digital democracy. The state isn't a slow-moving machine. It's a self-learning system that serves, adapts, and evolves.
Tangled tapestry. Legacy systems feel like blockers, but they hold deep value. What's emerging? Incremental modernization through strategies like replatforming and re-architecting, rather than full replacement. The opportunity? Balance evolution with continuity. Honor the past while architecting for agility. The past holds wisdom, but also the weight of old ways. The future demands change, but not at the cost of history. How do you modernize without unraveling what still matters?
So as we look at digital banking and the new horizon, and when I was prepping for it this week, I couldn't help but put my center in terms of we belong to Africa. And all the presentations today really have been around platforms that allow us to trade and tokenizations and cryptos. But the bigger question we need to ask ourselves is, how do we make this accessible? And when I was deep diving a little bit into blockchain, I came back to an African proverb that said, trust has always lived in communities where everyone sees everything and accountability keeps relationship going. And as we look into digital banking and the new ways of working, it's moving away from the idea that we need these fancy platforms, and yes, we do. Technology is amazing. And we need these faster systems around us and new features and pretty screens and so forth. But it comes down to the idea of how do we reimagine and build trust in society where we can give access to all. And so as we look at it, I'm going to take us through a few years, 2030, 2040, 2050. And again, this is a thought-provoking session. We can think about how it integrates to blockchain going forward from an Africa perspective. But if we really look at it, we want to be able to have institutions, and it's not just banks, that truly know us. Whether we're trading or investing, be able to give us those nudges and those insights before we know we actually need to be looking at it. And so it is going to be an AI-driven world. It is going to be a tech-enabled world. But at the center of it all is really around the experience we want to give people, the ability for them to do it themselves without really asking for help. So when we look at redefining the rules and how rules are being changed from a banking perspective, let's see if this works. Some of the trends that we're seeing around this is, number one, really around this idea around personalization. And with all the platforms that I heard about this morning, one question kept coming to me is, how do they make it personal to me? And I think this is a big question that financial institutions are dealing with today in terms of customers don't want a blanket approach anymore. They want you to be able to meet their need and deal with them as a holistic human throughout their phases of life. So personalization is quite a key component at the moment, along with regulations, and we heard quite a bit about that this morning. Inclusiveness is becoming quite important. Ecosystems are shaping, so we're no longer having digital banks just be our traditional banks we see today, like our apps and our FNBs and our net banks and so forth. but we're seeing retailers enter the space, we're seeing telecoms enter into the space, and it's really around who can meet the customer's needs where they're at and be able to provide that lending component to them. Another one is from a tech perspective. My tech colleagues in the room, so I said to them that I'll do them very proud, even though this is not my specific space. From a tech perspective, we know AI is everywhere. No longer are we seeing a shift to AI being a feature anymore. I ping the button or I say, hey Siri, what's up? I hope my Siri doesn't activate now. It did, oh my goodness, no Siri. But it's not just a feature anymore. It's the holisticness of AI being part of everything that we do when we're trading on these platforms, when we're using different aspects of digital banking, whether it's on app or web. Probably another one to specifically highlight is the importance of data. Data is power, data does give access. And so how do we use that data in a smart way, really to meet where our clients are and our customers are in today's world? If I look specifically at blockchain and the future of blockchain from a digital banking perspective, there's really three key trends that are evolving in the specific space. The first one is around security. So looking at cryptographic protection from a fraud perspective, we're seeing immutable transaction records. From a transparency perspective, going back to the African proverb around community, visibility, accountability being held to those, really looking at that real-time audit capability and trust without having your intermediaries playing a role. So it's really cutting out the middleman. And from an efficiency perspective, we really are seeing an increase from a smart contract perspective, so automation of the specific process, and faster cross-border transactions. So we recently did an article with Citibank, which is one of our global clients, and the head of digital assets said this. I'm going to read it. He said, adoption of emerging technologies like blockchain is a natural next chapter in how banks are evolving to adapt an increasingly digital economy. The ability to move money 24/7, 365 days in a year in a programmable manner that is always on and reduces manual operation functions is really what we want to enable for our institutional clients. And I thought that was actually really powerful when he shared that, and I'm happy to share the article through the conference. But he's really talking about seamless processing. He's talking about always being switched on, always knowing what the customer wants, and the ability to meet those needs. So from a PwC perspective, when we look at digital banking, and what we find most of our clients struggle with is really the integration of business experience and technology. In a lot of the presentations I heard today, it's almost around how do we make this more seamless, but at the end of the day, business value needs to be derived from it. So we need to be making revenue, we need to be making money, we need to be reducing our costs from a business perspective. Experience talks about how do we meet the client and customer in terms of where they're at right now. And technology really talks about the enablement of that, the how. And so as we look at it, and the trend that we're not seeing, but one that is evolving quite a bit is, we can't forget that when we look at these new technologies like blockchain, cryptocurrencies, tokens, all these digital wallets coming in play, we're still bound to an African context. And that African context has customers that engage with it in different channels. Yes, there's digital, so there's platforms, and there's apps, and there's web, and there's so forth. But majority of our country and Africa actually still deal with the contact center, call center, even though you really do hate waiting in line to be, spoken to and a customer agent to engage with you, and branch. And so the question really is, as we look at blockchain, as we look at these new technologies, how do we integrate it into a society that still uses physical infrastructure? How do we create these digital platforms that is accessible, but integrates into call centers and branches so that it integrates, and it doesn't matter which entrance point the customer gets itself into, they're still able to engage and complete their transaction. So like I said, we deal with it in a three-lens approach: business, experience, and technology. And these actually go hand in hand with one another. So very quickly, business value for those that are bankers like Chipo, you'll know, all banks deal with this. When you're looking at digital banking, there's really 4 quadrants that one looks at. It is seamless onboarding. How do I make this process as seamless as possible without asking too many questions? And I guess it's applicable when you're looking at your different platforms for trading and such from a blockchain cryptocurrency perspective. Next-gen payments, we want fast payments, we want payments to be immediate. Blockchain has that ability to be a digital ledger, so we're able to see those transactions immediately, but it also cracks down the borders that are created with these cross-border transactions. Empowered money management, so I want to know what's kind of going on with my investments that I'm putting in, with my portfolios that I'm creating. And then enhanced servicing. So how do I get what I need, the right documentation, the right components when I need to look at different requirements that I need to make? And so, yes, we need to look at it from a tech perspective, and yes, we need to say what is the best technology that we can put into place. But from a business perspective, you need to be put it under what is the business value that I want, and how do I prioritize these digital products that are emerging really through the right channels so that I can hit that synergy between business and technology and what the customer is experiencing. So then if we look at the year 2040, and I'm going to read this because I really don't want to mess up the wording. By 2040, we have the borderless cooperative. The largest financial ecosystem is a decentralized network owned by its customers. Blockchain identity and AI risk models enable communities to pool resources and trade seamlessly across borders. Governance is participatory, transparent, and designed to serve prosperity, proving no one thrives unless all do. Again, we're going back to the concept of community. Trust lives in that community. So if I look at the E, which is experience, it's the X of BXT. One of the big trends that we're seeing at the moment is really, I think, we sometimes overlook the customer experience. Sometimes we're like, oh, let's just kind of identify what the customer needs are with all the different platforms we create and kind of sink in how we integrate it. But we are seeing a move to a more human-led design and taking a deep interest in terms of what do customers actually want and why. What are their happy parts, and what are their not so happy parts that we need to solve for? And when we look at experience, we need to have coherence by design. So that means that if we have various channels for our customers in the financial industry to engage and trade and invest with, how do we make sure that that experience is seamless across those channels, that they're not feeling a difference when it comes to it? The second key principle we look at is inclusive by nature. We live in Africa. If we want to be able to empower our continent, it cannot only be English that is used to trade and communicate and engage with. We need to start looking at inclusiveness from a language perspective. How are we able to educate and drive the usage using different languages in our country and in Africa? And the next one is personal by default. So how do we really make sure that we really are putting personalization up front and we're not making it generic? So consulting slide, I told you, I'm sorry. But it's really important to follow a process when you're looking at experience. And whether that is having a look at what are actually the journeys we want our customers to go on. When we want them to trade on our platforms, when we want them to invest, what actually is that journey we want them to go on? And how do you design that journey based on the needs that they specifically have? The ability to put the information in a really seamless way is quite important. At the moment, information and data is king. It's everywhere, but it's accessible for all of us. So when you're looking at an experience-led design for your customers, you really need to think about how do we make this easy and simple as possible. And then test it. We sometimes forget that when we test it in market, we're scared of the negative feedback we're going to get because we don't quite like it. We're living in an age today where people will comment about your business, about your product, about your platform on every single social media platform that exists. So it's really important to test and redefine and evolve as you go. The next one is technology. And so I think one of the biggest trends that we're seeing at the moment in terms of new horizon for digital banking is intelligence must flow everywhere. It's not about a feature anymore. On the platforms that you have from a trading perspective, AI actually helps to educate and give your customer insights when they're about to invest, when they're about to buy. It really is a friend or buddy that's there, but it's part of the process. It's not something that's siloed out. And so when we look at intelligence, when we look at AI, and I know sometimes it's a buzzword that comes through, but it's really around that integration and making it feel like a human-like intervention. It's the worst when you call and you get a bot on the phone and you're like, I just want to speak to a human being, please. I know I get deeply frustrated with that. Proactive engagement. Gone are the days where customers are going to be reactive. They want to know at the tip of the finger what's about to happen. And intelligence helps to evolve and direct that. Triggered insights. So what we're seeing, and Discovery is doing really well at the moment, they've actually made it part of how a customer banks. It is an engagement tool. And it's really around driving those insights so that they can then make informed decisions. And the last one is around orchestrated layers. The next slide is a very ticky slide, but it's really important that as we look at digital banking, and remember, it's not just traditional banks that are playing in the space anymore, and the video leaned itself towards saying that we have these legacy systems that are attached to us, but it doesn't mean they're wrong. It doesn't mean that we need to push them aside and start from scratch. It just means we need to redefine them a little bit. And what we're seeing players in the financial services space do is start to look at their architecture in a very layered way. It needs to be customer and business-led. Remember I said it cannot be separated anymore. You need to be able to take that into account. We need to look at the integration between channels, between digital to physical channels. The interoperability layer that feeds between the two is also really important in terms of it being data and insights-led. And then obviously it plugs into the core systems that run the back end of the bank. And so it is almost a layered component in terms of as you look at your architecture from a tech perspective, and yes, a lot of the new technologies got this right a little bit, but some of us have a catching up journey to do. This is something that's quite key to land on. So year 2050, let's go to the next slide. Year 2050, the living economy. By 2050, finance is woven invisibly into daily life, guided by AI trained on decades of cultural and environmental wisdom. Payments, credit, and investment happen in the background, optimizing for both wealth and planetary health. The economy becomes a living system that learns and grows with its people. And I think if I have to bring this all together, business creates value, experience earns trust, and technology enables it all. And blockchain sits beneath that, redefining how trust is earned. And so I come back to the circle of trust that I started with in terms of opening with trust really started from an African perspective and it's embedded in the community, is that when you really think about it, blockchain isn't new. It's simply bringing us full circle, taking the wisdom of community and powering it through technology. And if anything, I hope this was a little bit of a thought-provoking presentation, sharing a little bit of insight in terms of how different competitors are targeting customers in this specific space. Thank you.